Time now to talk about some major political news so far this week with Ryland Barton, who's an editor and reporter with National Public Radio, NPR. Good to see you, Ryland.
Good to see you too, Renee.
Let's start with the new or the incoming Kentucky Senate Majority Floor Leader, Max Wise, who was a 10-year senator. He first started serving in 2015, and now he's been a chairman of committees, and now he is making his ascension soon as the Majority Floor Leader, and he's making the media rounds to talk about his role and how he's going to manage the caucus and the bills. And he's also said there's one issue in particular that will not be on the back burner, but the front burner. And what is that and why?
Yeah, it's the so-called anti-DEI bill, anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion bill for higher education. This is something that he had been a player in trying to get a bill passed this last year. There are a couple different versions of what that policy could have looked like, and also he was somebody who championed this issue, in K-12 education, sponsoring the bill that really tried to limit how people talk about race, people talk about history, also how teachers talk about sex and sexuality in the classroom. So this one is geared towards higher education. The version that had been proposed this last year was trying to prohibit discriminatory concepts in non-classroom settings, but also it was something that would have prevented universities from requiring, statements from staff or faculty and students on, promising to teach around diversity and other issues. This has been part of a larger movement across the country of conservatives trying to dismantle some of these diversity forward programs, especially in higher education, but we've seen it in the private sector as well. A lot of this as well happened after the U.S. Supreme Court ruling from last year that undermined affirmative action programs in higher education. So a lot of these state legislatures, but also universities and kind of conservative leaders on their own have been doing this. Universities around Kentucky have already started doing this on their own, really in anticipation of a bill like this that would start dismantling it. So, some universities like University of Kentucky, Northern Kentucky University have started dismantling their DEI programs on their own.
Right. And we've even heard the House Speaker, David Osborne, say that in reaction to what the universities have done, that they will try to codify some of that to make sure that that holds. So we'll keep our eye on that when the session begins on January 7th.
Coming up.
Yeah. Lots of already starting before we start, right? So now let's talk about Washington and our two U.S. senators. The first, the junior U.S. Senator, Rand Paul, is in the news, and the enterprising reporter that he is, Tom Loftus with the Kentucky Lantern, has uncovered that U.S. Senator Rand Paul has been going on some lavish trips, courtesy to some political donors. Tell us about this.
Yeah, Tom Loftus retired a couple of years ago, but you wouldn't really be able to notice from all the great journalism that he's done over the last couple of years. He discovered that Rand Paul, most recently had spent about $50,000 in campaign money for luxurious hotels, restaurants, and travel services in Sweden and Denmark over this. I think this was last year or earlier this year, and this was Rand Paul's campaign says this was an authorized use of that campaign money, that he was using it to raise for other money. Sure, it is illegal to raise campaign funds from foreign nationals, but they're saying that this was for, this is for other, United States citizens who are traveling abroad, but also, United States citizens who live abroad as well. And they say that they raised about $100,000 from that. In Tom's story, he said that they didn't respond to a question on whether or not that accounted for the $50,000 that they paid for that, or if that was just the total gross that they were able to get from that particular campaign trip. But this also continues a pattern for Senator Paul in booking some pretty lavish, campaign trips around the country. His campaigns reported about 25 grand at a ski resort in Utah over the 2022 election period, another $19,000 in bookings through ski.com, a lot of other trips to ski resorts around the country. And there's also a trip to Hawaii here, but again, his campaign defends this as this is how he is raising money for his political campaigns and his political political action committees, which have done quite well, and especially in recent years, there has about, at the end of the last campaign, had about had about $5 million left in the bank in 2022, and now since then he raised another $7 million. So it's these trips have they've worked out, I guess, because his campaign coffers are really overflowing, and he's not really running into many competitive races in the future, and he won't be up for re-election until 2028.
Right. And there's nothing illegal about what he's doing, right?
No, then there's, again, as long as he's raising money through United States citizens, whether they live abroad or traveling abroad, there's nothing improper about this. As long as those trips can be justified as, legitimate meeting with potential donors to raise money for his campaign and his political groups.
So shifting to the senior U.S. Senator Mitch McConnell, there's been a story by Austin Horn of the Lexington Herald-Leader and others who've talked about, well, what's next and who is gunning for his seat in 2026. And McConnell, as we have reported, has not announced his intentions to retire from the upper chamber or run in 2026. But there's some reporting that suggests some folks may be positioning themselves for such a run.
Right. Austin Horn at the Lexington Herald-Leader discovered that somebody has bought a lot of campaign websites for Kentucky politicians for Senate who might run for Senate in 2026 when McConnell would be up for re-election. So 6th District Congressman Andy Barr, 2nd District Congressman Brett Guthrie, 1st District Congressman James Comer, Daniel Cameron, the former Attorney General who ran for governor, also U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Kelly Craft. And these are websites that are kind of like andybarforsenate.com. James Comer for Senate.com. These are all, none of the candidates would these potential candidates would confirm that they're actually seeking office, and there's really no indication of who is doing this. There's a bit of a practice of people squatting on websites like this, just in case somebody runs for office and they really want to have that domain name that they can get that candidate to then buy from them. There's actually a pretty famous example this year where somebody had bought the harriswalls.com website ahead of that campaign, that ticket being created, and they the campaign ended up buying that website domain from that person for $15,000. So it can be quite lucrative for people to do that, and it seems like somebody may have gone ahead and done that on behalf of some of these Republican candidates. As you said, Mitch McConnell has not said that he's not running for re-election. Certainly seems like some signs are pointing that way since he stepped down from Republican leadership in the Senate this year, but we will see, and we're kind of awaiting to see what happens. There's still a couple more years to decide on that. Yeah,
certainly. But the fundraising will start soon, sooner rather than later, right? Well, good to hear from you always, Rylan, for your insight and your perspective about these issues and more. And we'll talk to you next week.
Great to see you too, Renee.